Hey guys, welcome. If you're new here, maybe you found this video because you have a goat who has precocious udder. Welcome to the channel. And this channel is all dedicated to animal husbandry. So I have animals as small as 2 pounds all the way up to 1,000 pounds, and everything that I learn along the way, I make videos about and I share them with you. So let's begin. And I knew she was going to come in the video. Every time I make a video, she can't help herself. Well, this is fitting. Guys, this is Lois. Lois has precocious udder. This video is all about her. So Lois is an alpine dairy goat. And Lois comes from a pretty heavy milking line of goats. And if you're not familiar with what that means, basically that means that her mom and dad, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, all were heavy milk producers. And originally I picked her just because I read a lot about goats and goat breeds, and I read just how docile and friendly alpines can be. And I also really like the size of them because Lois and her half-sister Marge, which she's over there eating right now, I wanted them to be of a size that they were more comfortable being around horses. So they originally were meant to be companions to my 2 horses, and just to kind of have like a bigger herd environment, but also as a benefit would be weed control. So if you know anything about goats, you know that they love to eat weeds, and they have been great for that. They've really helped keep the weed population down in pasture. So that was our original intent when we got Lois. And about roughly a year ago, Miss Lois here developed an udder, and she has never been bred. So that breaks all the rules, right? So in order for any mammal to develop an udder or milk in their mammary tissue, typically that animal will be bred, meaning they are going to have a baby. That was not the case with Lois. And the first time I ever saw it, she was in the pasture climbing on a stump, as goats do, and I looked down and I'm like, her udder looks bigger than usual. I would say at that time it was probably about the size of like maybe half of a softball. If you cut a softball in half, it just kind of was sort of swollen looking. The teeth still look normal. They weren't engorged or anything like that, but the udder itself, like the bag, if you will, was larger than normal. So I did a little research, found out what it could be, and I spoke with the woman who bred her, and she confirmed that yes, indeed, Miss Lois comes from heavy milking lines, and she has had other young does in the past come into milk. So she advised me, along with my vet, I did contact my vet as well, to just monitor her udder and to not touch it, to not try to milk or anything like that, but just to monitor it, make sure that it wasn't actually filling with milk and becoming engorged, or making sure that she didn't have mastitis, which we're going to go over all of that in just a few minutes, so just bear with me. I'm just giving you the backstory here. So that was midsummer of last year. All through the winter, the udder basically shrank. I would say it was still slightly larger than what Marge's is, her half-sister, but it definitely went down from what it was in the summer. And then this past April, her and her sister Marge were in the barn playing. And if you have goats, you know what I'm talking about. They'll go up on their rear legs and they will headbutt each other. That's like the games that they play. So I just happened to look over, and Lois went up on her front legs, and I glanced down, and oh my goodness, for a split second, this sounds like ridiculous, but I thought that she had, I thought I saw a penis. So I know that sounds crazy. Of course, females don't have penises, but like in the moment, really quickly, I glanced over and I thought that because her udder was so engorged, her teats were so engorged and they were bright, bright pink. And I felt terrible. I'm like, my goodness, how, this is March. How could I have missed something like that? But this is my very first time dealing with something like this, and I wasn't thinking to continually check it once the spring came around and the pastures got a little richer. Mark, come on, get out of here. I was thinking that, okay, her udder had shrank through the winter, maybe we're just done with this issue, and that was not the case. So, long story short, she became engorged from eating this very lush pasture behind me and started producing milk. Not only did her udder get huge, she started producing milk, and a lot of milk. And unfortunately at that time, because I wasn't monitoring it, she also developed mastitis. So that is the story of Miss Lois, and kind of like bring you guys up to date as to where we are now. So I wrote some notes down so I didn't forget anything. I want to quickly go over what can cause precocious udder. And some of you may already know what it is, but it's important to know why it's happening, the causes, because even if you want to keep the milk, if something goes wrong, like you get mastitis or etc., whatever, it's good to know why this is actually happening, because that can dictate what you might want to do if things do go wrong in the future. Okay? And obviously this is super important if you are someone who does not want to keep the milk and you want to stop the milk production altogether. You need to know why it's happening so you can eliminate the cause. Okay? So number one, hormonal imbalances. So this can be from genetics and also the environment. And that is what's going on with Lois. So number one, she comes from a heavy milking line, and her hormones are just a surgeon. She's got a lot of estrogen, but also she lives in a very rich environment. So she has a lot of saplings to eat. We have black raspberries. We have all kinds of vines through the pasture. I mean, her job was weed control initially. So she has access to a very rich and diverse forage and browse environment. Okay, so second would be thyroid issues, in particular hypothyroidism. I'm not dealing with that right now, but just make note of that if that's something that you are dealing with. Third thing, early breeding. So young does in particular, if they are bred too soon, can develop an udder prior to the birth of the kid. So typically, like typically, all the time, if this is the case, the animal will have been bred, but they'll develop an udder much sooner than they would have. So bear that in mind. Fourth thing, a pseudo pregnancy, aka false pregnancy. This to me, although a separate issue, sounds similar to just a generalized precocious udder, because it's a hormonal imbalance. So the body thinks that something is happening even though it's not actually happening. And the hormones within their body will react according to what they think is going on. So to me, the symptoms of a pseudo pregnancy when I was researching this were similar to a precocious udder. Slight differences, but again, make note of that. If that's something you're dealing with, look into that a little further. Then we have mastitis. This was interesting to me. I didn't realize this, that even if the animal does not develop an udder at all, they can still get mastitis, unfortunately. So even if, like Marge, for example, she has no udder, she just has two tiny little teats. If she were to maybe injure her udder, maybe she got kicked by a horse, or playing with her sister, or maybe fell on something that might make some sort of trauma to her udder, even though it's really not an udder, it's very small, she could get mastitis. And when they get mastitis, they can then develop an udder and actually start producing milk because of all the inflammation from the injury, from the trauma. So that's really important. Next, neoplasia, aka tumors. So if the animal were to have a tumor inside of their udder, that can trigger a hormonal response in the body that will then further develop the udder and cause the animal to produce milk. And then lastly, and this kind of ties into the first thing with environment, is nutrition. So if the animal is eating a very high protein diet and just that richness, that overabundance of protein can trigger an environment in the body that would produce or cause them to produce milk. So again, that kind of ties into my first point, genetics and environment. Obviously, that is my main issue here. She is living in what my vet likes to call goat heaven, which is a compliment to a certain extent. So those are the causes. So like I said earlier, if you want to stop the issue, you need to stop the cause. So figure out what's going on with your goat, and then you can devise a plan on how to stop that. Now, if you want to keep the milk, like I said, it's still important to know why it's happening in case things go wrong in the future. Now let's talk about, should you keep the milk or should you not keep the milk? Pros and cons of both. This is really important. So if you do not want to keep the milk, you have to be very careful with your management, okay? Because you could end up like I did initially and have an animal with an engorged udder that you missed, which then leads to mastitis. So if you are not keeping the milk, a lot of people will say, don't touch the udder at all, do not milk at all. While that will work for some people, it's not going to work for everyone because of the amount of milk that the animal might be producing. If the animal is only producing a small amount of milk, that will likely work. If the animal is producing a large amount of milk, in the case of Miss Lois, where her little udder looked like a freaking basketball, that's not going to work because she's continually going to bump her udder off of something. Her little teat orifices are going to be open to the environment, to bacteria. And so basically I had to milk her because she was, number one, uncomfortable, and she was getting mastitis. So try to keep that in mind, whether or not you want to go either way. Now, even if you don't want to keep the milk, but you're finding that you have to milk her to keep your animal comfortable, you can, over time, attempt to dry them off like you would a normal, freshening animal. But that's going to take time, and it needs to be done slowly and using good milking practices. You're very clean, etc., etc. Okay. So if you're wanting to not keep the milk, like I said, you can just ignore the udder altogether, but be very cautious and monitor daily, maybe even twice daily. Because I can tell you, in an animal who is producing milk, you have to milk them minimum 1 to 2 times a day. Typically, most milk producers, I should say, farmers are milking their animals twice a day. If you were to skip a milking with an animal who's producing like a full load of milk, then you really run the risk of causing serious issues. So if it were me, knowing what I know now, if I had an animal again who had a precocious udder that I did not want to keep the milk from, I would monitor them twice a day, check the udder, make sure that it's not too full, make sure that it's not red, make sure that it's not hot, and make sure that you don't feel any lumps inside of it. As long as you can check all of those boxes, then the animal is good until the next time you check them. Okay? And in that case, you're going to want to look at the diet of the animal, remove any high protein feeds. You might want to switch them to a different type of hay. If you're feeding like an alfalfa hay or something that's really rich, high protein, you may want to switch them to like a timothy or an orchard grass, something like that, a mixed grass maybe. So just basically reducing their protein, reducing their calories. So so that the body doesn't have that excess of nutrients to turn into milk. Okay, so that's kind of what you do if you don't want to keep the milk. If you do want to keep the milk, you must adhere to very strict milking cleanliness practices. I learned this the hard way. I thought I was doing a good job, and I was not. So now I do everything that the typical dairy farmer does. I wash the udder thoroughly. Well, technically, let me back up. I will usually brush off her belly a little bit. I will wash the udder thoroughly, dry it thoroughly, and then I will milk her out. And then I do a teat dip with an iodine solution afterwards. So just make sure that if you do decide to keep the milk, that you adhere to very strict milking cleanliness practices. That is so important. Don't just run out into the field and milk your goat onto the ground and then just walk away like I did and learn the hard way. That's not acceptable. You're going to cause your animal a lot of problems. How often do you need to milk a goat with precocious udder? That is entirely dependent on how much milk they are producing. So initially, Lois was making about 1 to 2 cups of milk per milking. And at that time, I was only milking her once a day. So 1 to 2 cups per day is what she was giving me initially. And just to clarify, I started milking her daily because I did not want to allow her to become engorged and to get mastitis again, because she had already had that. And I just felt like because of the environment that she lives in, this was going to be a recurrent issue if I didn't milk her regularly. So that's why I chose that. Just want to clarify. And as things progressed, as the pasture plants grew, she started making more and more milk. So now I will typically get 2 to 3 cups of milk twice a day. So I'm milking her about 8 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock at night, sometimes 8:30 and 8:30. And I chose that time frame because we get home from work then, and I knew that I could keep that regular schedule. Which, by the way, super important here. If you are going to milk your animals, you must maintain a regular milking schedule. You cannot milk your animal at 6 o'clock in the morning one day and then wait until 2 o'clock in the afternoon the next day. That's how engorgement happens. That's how mastitis happens. Okay? You need to maintain a regular schedule, whatever that is. And bear that in mind when you're making the decision as to whether or not you want to keep the milk. Can I maintain a regular milking schedule? I can. I have a business, a job that allows me to be more flexible with my schedule. I'm not traveling. If you're someone that has to travel, then you better have someone, family, friend, whatever, that knows how to milk and that they're reliable and they can come and milk for you, because milking is a commitment. Hi, Lois. She's back. Come on. Come here. And yeah, you can't miss your milking. Can't do it. Now, a question I see a lot online is whether or not the milk that comes from a goat with precocious udder is safe to drink. And the answer is yes, it is. Very much so. So much so that, in my case, my dad, who loves whole milk, has told me many times that Lois's milk is the sweetest milk he has ever drank in his life. It's sweet, it's creamy, it's wonderful. I'm not a huge milk drinker personally, but what I will do is I use it as coffee creamer, and it's excellent. And by the way, I don't pasteurize the milk. I'm just using it raw. And if you didn't know, if you are lactose intolerant, the reason you are lactose intolerant is because of pasteurization. So when you pasteurize your milk, meaning you heat it up to a certain temperature, that will kill the enzymes in the milk that we need to digest those milk sugars. And when those enzymes are not present, our gut cannot properly break down the sugars in the milk and we have issues. So if you are lactose intolerant, you could try drinking raw milk and see if it works for you. I should have mentioned this earlier. I forgot. A good thing to have on hand if you do have a goat with precocious udder is the California mastitis test, also known as the CMT test. It's a very inexpensive test that you can buy online. They ship it to you in a box. It's a surfactant solution that you will mix up, and you take a sample of milk from each udder and you add in an equal amount of the solution into, they give you like a little paddle, has like little bowls in it, and you swirl it around, and it's a mastitis test. So you will know whether or not your animal has mastitis, and you may even want to check it on a semi-regular basis if you have an animal that you're keeping the milk from. I would do it maybe at least once a month just to check, maybe more if you've had an issue in the past. And basically what will happen when you put the solution into the milk is the milk will get a little thick, sometimes so much so that it will actually turn to almost like a jelly. And then you know that, okay, this animal has mastitis, we want to discard the milk and we want to treat with antibiotics. All right, I feel like I covered everything. I know there was a lot. This is going to be a long video, so thanks for sticking around. And lastly, when Lois gives you milk, you make soap with it. So my next video, I would love to show you how I am making goat's milk soap. Thanks for sticking around. I'll see you in the next video.